Once upon a time, the world used to be a wild and dangerous place, filled with miracles and wonders, and inhabited by many beings that elude our comprehension still. Beings which, no matter the efforts, would simply not be tamed. Old things, powerful things, dangerous things. Even now, in a world that seems to barely be able to contain them anymore, they haven't gone anywhere. If you know where to look, you might just spot them. Come, let me show you.
Baba Yaga, Baba Yaga, Baba Yaga, Yaga, Baba Yaga, Baba Yaga, Baba Yaga. Baba Yaga, Baba Yaga, Baba Yaga, Yaga, Baba Yaga, Baba Yaga, Baba Yaga.
As most of us, at some point or another in your life, you might have found yourself taking a leisurely stroll through the woods. As some of us, you might have found yourself still treading earthy trails while night was quietly falling around you. Common sense would have then called for you to find shelter, make camp and light a fire, rest until the break of dawn. Surely humans are not meant to walk in the woods at night. Most humans are afraid of the dark, are they not? But you, like few of us, are not most people. You know for a fact that sometimes if you don't keep your feet, there's no knowing where you might be swept off to. That happens to be particularly accurate at nighttime. For instance, a peaceful path through a glade might somehow take the unwary traveler deep inside the heart of the woods, old and twisted and unsympathetic to silly humans. There, the most unfortunate traveler can sometimes stumble upon a sight that would make the faint of heart pass out, and even those of a more heroic disposition at least shiver. Just like Vasilisa. Excuse me? You're not familiar with the tale of Vasilisa? Goodness gracious, what are they teaching in schools nowadays? Anyway, it goes something like this. Once upon a time, somewhere in the Russian Empire, there lived a wealthy merchant. His name was Grigory Alexandrov, and if asked, he would have told you that it wasn't rubles piled in the bank that was his wealth, but rather his family. His wife Ekaterina and his daughter Vasilisa. They lived happily together for quite some time, until one year, around Vasilisa's 10th birthday, tragedy suddenly struck. Ekaterina was dying, and no physician, priest or healer could do anything about it. Knowing her time had come, she called for her daughter and looked upon her face one last time. "I am going now, child, and I fear that with me goes much of your father also. But even though I will be no more by your side, I wouldn't leave you alone either. Therefore, I am giving you this doll, together with my love and blessing. Whenever you shall find yourself in need of help or want of a friend, take a crumb of your food and feed the doll, and help you shall receive, a friend you shall find." And just like that, without even a farewell, she was gone. After her passing, the fate of the Alexandrov family began to turn sour. What was that saying? All happy families are alike. Each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. Where before there had been laughter, now was a graveyard silence. Where once had been lights, now there was but darkness. Grigory lost all will to live and drowned his sorrows in vodka until he nearly forgot he still had a daughter. In spite of this, Vasilisa proved remarkable strength of character to grow up alone, having to care for an absent and drunk father, without losing herself in the process. But sooner rather than later, Vasilisa would be tested yet again. On the 6th anniversary of her mother's death, Vasilisa woke up from an uneasy sleep. Something felt wrong, dreadfully wrong. Praying nothing had happened, Vasilisa went to check on her father. She found him in his bedchamber, in darkness and amidst a pile of broken bottles, floating 4 feet above the floor, hanged from a chandelier. Just like that, she found herself completely alone, sent off to live with an uncle she had never met before. Gone was her life of plenty. Gone was her freedom to do as she pleased. Gone were the days every young woman envied her position and wealth. Gone was her family. Her new family had taken her in only in hopes of inheriting something from Grigori's wealth. So it came that Vasilisa's new family had nothing but contempt for her, contempt and jealousy. She was made to live in conditions worse than the servants, made to perform chore after chore all day long at the whim of her aunt and uncle, who took particular delight in constantly reminding her of her luck. After all, she would have wound up in a state orphanage if it hadn't been for them. Vasilisa never said a word in retaliation, never complained, and always completed her chores beyond any expectations, to the chagrin of her relatives. Unbeknownst to them, however, Vasilisa still had a friend. Do you remember the doll? Yes, the doll her mother had gifted her. Each morning she would feed it and ask for help, and each day the doll would perform a small miracle for her. In spite of her new life of toil and trouble, Vasilisa was growing ever more beautiful. In the meanwhile, Uncle Dmitri and Aunt Aglaya were scratching their brains trying to come up with a task that Vasilisa wouldn't be able to complete. Preferably a dangerous task, perhaps, one that would see them inheriting the fortune of the late Grigory Alexandrov. The opportunity seemed to arise one day when, while at the market, Aunt Aglaya overheard a fishmonger telling a tale of a hut that had appeared seemingly overnight in the deep woods. A strange hut that reeked of death, that even the wolves were afraid to approach. The next evening, Vasilisa was sent into the woods with precise instructions to find the said hut and to persuade the babushka living there to give her fire for their cold hearth. She was told not to return empty-handed or else... So Vasilisa took the path towards the heart of the woods, her own heart perhaps beating faster than usual. But she went nevertheless. She walked and walked through the night until the dawn broke, and as the first light of the day began to pierce the foliage of the trees, a man galloped past Vasilisa, a man clad in white riding a white horse. He disappeared just as quickly as he had appeared. Puzzled, she pressed forward. Later in the day, a second rider passed her, but this one was dressed in red and riding an auburn horse. Vasilisa mustered her courage and kept walking. The third rider passed by her when the last light of the day was fading. He was wearing black, and black was his horse. As night fell around her, Vasilisa found herself in a glade, and the sight before her made her freeze in her tracks. There was a hut, standing atop a chicken leg, a hut that was spinning and hopping in place, and around it in a perfect circle there was a fence made entirely out of human bones, topped with skulls whose sockets were aflame. Vasilisa couldn't have moved if she had wanted to. This is where the babushka found her. Now, this wasn't your ordinary babushka, although she resembled one, old and crooked with bony fingers and a sullen disposition. This one, however, arrived flying in a giant mortar and landed with a thud in front of the hut, which seemed to welcome her.
Oh, don't I smell the sweetest smell? Mortal flesh and feet of stone, knocking at my door of bone. Uncle, alas, Mythology. Tell Baba, what is it you want, Mama? With the love or wish for gold, wish to buy what ain't being sold?
Vasilisa told the old woman that she wasn't looking for either, but rather she would borrow from her fire if the babushka would allow it. The crone seemed quite taken aback by the request, but she agreed to it, on condition that Vasilisa perform a series of tasks for her beforehand.
Oh, should you not be able to complete the tasks, then I shall eat you for dinner. Kill your bones in such a manner. But as tomorrow, now we shall sleep. Good night.
And with the deal struck, they slept. The next morning, the babushka left Vasilisa in the household as she flew again to an undisclosed destination. Until her return, Vasilisa was to clean the yard, cook a meal that would say 12 grown Cossacks, do the laundry, separate 12 sacks of poppy seeds from grains of dirt, and 12 sacks of rotten corn from healthy corn. The tasks were daunting, but with the help of the doll and a teeny bit of magic, they were completed before nightfall when the crone returned. She looked obviously disappointed, but after a thorough inspection, could do nothing but declare herself content and allowed Vasilisa to ask her about what she had seen. The girl asked about the riders she had encountered the day before and found out they were day, sun and night, and all of them were in the babushka service. Vasilisa was tempted to ask about the hut, but, feeling the doll twitching nervously in her pocket, she refrained.
Young you are, but wiser still. Not to take the blood-red pill. Too much knowledge for your kin makes one old, quicker than sin. Take no fire for your hearth. When you die, you keep your heart.
And so, Vasilisa left the hut carrying one of the babushka's flaming skulls. When she arrived back at her uncle's house, she found out that in her absence, no one had been able to light as much as a match. When she finally met her aunt and uncle, the fire from the skull erupted and burned them to ashes where they stood. After this, Vasilisa went on to live a long and happy life. And yet, from time to time, she would catch herself wonder about that hut on chicken legs deep into the heart of the woods, wondering, what if she had asked the question, what's with the hut on chicken legs? Apart from Vasilisa's tale, many others have been recorded throughout the years. None of them hold the complete truth, but what is clear beyond any doubt is this. In the heart of the woods, there is a hut. A wooden hut, perched atop a scrawny chicken leg that continuously spins and hops and emits the occasional blood-curdling screech. A fence made out of human bones adorned with fiery-eyed skulls surrounds the hut. Those of you who have grown up calling your grandmother's babushka, who know exactly who Josip Vissarionovich was, and those who can tell whether a pickle is perfectly pickled simply because there is no such thing as unpickled pickle when you're hungover and vodka, know exactly who lives in the hut. They know her name to be Baba Yaga. You've heard about Baba Yaga, the boogeyman, right? The nightmare of the Russian criminal underworld, a man of focus, commitment, sheer You've heard wrong. Contrary to popular belief, that is not who Baba Yaga is. That's just Hollywood propaganda. The real Baba Yaga shares precious little with John Wick. She's nowhere near as good looking, nor does she exhibit his proclivity for guns. Lots of guns. But I digress. Let's get back to our menacing hut spinning hypnotically atop a chicken leg or two, and let's try to unfold the mystery of Yaga Baba. To accomplish this, we would have to turn to far more reliable sources of information than Tinseltown. Stories about Baba Yaga have, after all, populated a Slavic folklore for centuries now, yet all of them fail to pierce the shroud of mystery that she successfully wears even today. Those uninitiated in the delicate art of unweaving stories and gazing beyond that which is shown might not be familiar with the name of the great late Russian explorer and alchemist Valery Veratkin-Vorodnikov, nor with his essential, although ponderous tome Monstry Slavianskich Lesov. And yet, this is where we learn that although Baba Yaga's true nature remains impossible to discern, her existence is still bound to the material world, although far less so than yours or mine. She has been described by eyewitnesses as a being of undiscernible age, old as sin if those with a more poetic disposition are to be believed, a creature of immense power and authority over the natural world, who usually appears in the shape of an impossibly old woman. From here on, accounts begin to differ and vary. There are some who claim Baba Yaga to be the size of an ogre, resting in her hut stretched over the oven from one corner to the other. Others vehemently deny these exaggerations and claim her to have the stature of an ordinary grandma. There are some who say her nose is crooked like a hook and long enough to reach the ceiling of her hut. Some say she has sharp iron teeth. What is clear, however, is that Baba Yaga seems to possess some sort of shape-shifting abilities, appearing differently to those who see her. A hypothesis claims she appears to others as a mere reflection of themselves. Even though most testimonies locate her firmly in the Slavic world, there are tales that suggest she might have traveled as far as the Japanese Isles. The samurai Akio Hideyoshi writes of an encounter he had with a creature who bore a striking resemblance to Yaga. He called her Yamamba and described her as a hideous old crone who had kidnapped the shogun's children and, save for his heroic intervention, would have most definitely eaten them. Whether this tale is true or not, whether he truly met Baba Yaga or a distant cousin, remains up for debate to this day. The peculiarity of Yaga that sets her apart from the more common witch or hag is indeed the striking detail from Hideyoshi's tale. She is said to have developed a taste for human flesh. But there is more to it than just that. Although most folk tales would have you believe Baba Yaga is a mindless monster who devours each and all who cross her path, this is most likely a fabrication whose origin can be traced back to the Great Witch Purges of 1666. Why would certain men want to instill fear of certain women in the minds of the masses? Well, that is an altogether different subject. The fact remains that in spite of all the fear-mongering, Baba Yaga is a far more complex character than the monster she has been painted to be. First and foremost, Yaga is ancient, a vessel of memories that have long passed out of recollection. She's a keeper of transgenerational wisdom, similar to Frank Herbert's Benneger's Reverend Mother. They are both feared, but where one is revered, the other is despised. Ironic, isn't it? It is said in ancient texts that long ago Baba Yaga was akin in nature to a goddess of death, guiding the souls of the mortals to the next world. She has also been named as a keeper of the waters of life and death. It is unclear how much of these tales are true, but the fact remains that Yaga is in some ways a prototype of the utterly self-sufficient being. She is free to do as she pleases, and live her life on her own terms. And even though she has a penchant for mischief and chaos resembling that of Loki, she has never been known to actively seek the ill of mortals. To those who have afforded her the respect and courtesy she deserves, Baba Yaga has even proved to be an unlikely helper. Vasilisa would know a thing or two about that. Of Baba Yaga, the flesh-eating wicked witch of the East, the wizened crone and shape-shifting hermit, this we have managed to gather after many a long hour spent pondering over dusty old tomes. Perhaps Yaga is in fact the monster folktales have portrayed her to be. Perhaps she's an indifferent creature living a life we couldn't begin to comprehend. Perhaps she's largely what we make her to be. Perhaps you should go out there and find out for yourselves.